People say young people do not date anymore, as if an entire generation just became colder, lazier, more selfish, too damaged to love. That story is convenient because it is simple. It turns a global shift into a personal flaw. But the moment you zoom out, it starts to break. Because this is not just happening in one country. It is happening across the United States, across Europe, across East Asia. Different cultures, different histories, different rules, same retreat. People are stepping back from love. So this is not a local story anymore. It is a global one. And once you see that, the question changes. Maybe people did not stop wanting love. Maybe love just stopped feeling survivable. That is a very different story. We like to say love is optional now. No one forces you to date. No one forces you to marry. You can stay single. You can live alone. You can reject the old timeline. On paper, that looks like freedom. But freedom has a shadow. Because even in a world where relationships are optional, being unable to have one still feels like failure. That pressure never disappeared. It just changed its tone. No one says you must be in love, but people still quietly believe you should at least be able to be loved. That is the trap. You are allowed to opt out. You are not really allowed to feel unwanted. Love is optional now. Being unwanted is not. So people live inside a contradiction. Love is supposed to be a choice, but not being chosen still feels humiliating. That is why this is not indifference. It is fear mixed with exhaustion. Start with the United States. America talks about independence well. Single life is normalized. Boundaries are respected. Being alone is not shameful. But modern dating there often feels less like romance and more like a marketplace. You build a profile. You sell a version of yourself. You compete for attention. You learn to be judged in seconds. Swipe, match, perform, disappear, repeat. It is not that people do not want connection. It is that connection has been forced into a system that makes everyone feel replaceable. Every interaction comes with comparison. Every silence feels like ranking. Every date feels partly like evaluation. After enough of that, people say, "I am happier alone." Sometimes that is true, but often what they really mean is this: I am tired of offering myself up to a system that turns intimacy into self-marketing. America did not stop believing in love. It made love feel like a market, then acted surprised when people got tired of shopping. Now look at Europe. In Europe, love is not rejected. It is deferred. People still want relationships. They still want partnership. They still want a shared life. But the life around love has become unstable. Housing is expensive. Work is uncertain. The future feels delayed. And when the future is delayed, love gets delayed with it. Because relationships do not survive on feeling alone. They need time, space, predictability, energy left over after survival. That is what many people no longer have. So the decision is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. Not now. Maybe later. After work settles down. After I move. After life becomes more stable. But stability keeps moving further away. So delay starts to look like disinterest. It is not disinterest. It is material exhaustion wearing the mask of choice. Europe did not give up on intimacy. It just kept pushing intimacy into a future that became harder to reach. Then there is East Asia. This is where the weight becomes obvious. Because love there is rarely treated as just love. It comes attached to a sequence: dating, marriage, housing, family approval, financial pressure, children, responsibility. One step quietly implies the next. So even the beginning feels heavy. In East Asia, love rarely feels private. It feels audited. Romance is not just chemistry. It is the opening move in a brutally expensive life structure. That changes the threshold. People do not just ask, "Do I like this person?" They ask, "Can I afford where this leads? Can I carry what this becomes? Do I want the entire structure attached to it?" So when people hesitate, it is not always because they feel nothing. It is because beginning no longer feels small. It feels like the first payment on a life they are not sure they can afford. East Asia did not lose the ability to love. It loaded love with too much consequence, too much cost, too much future. And then it blamed the hesitation on the individual. But the hesitation is structural. Now step back. The United States turns intimacy into a market. Europe postpones intimacy through instability. East Asia ties intimacy to an unaffordable life path. 3 different mechanisms, same result. Love becomes heavy. That is the common thread. Not the death of romance, not a broken generation, not a sudden collapse of feeling. Weight. Love now arrives carrying too much. More calculation, more economic pressure, more self-consciousness, more emotional risk. And when enough weight gets attached to something, people do not need to hate it to avoid it. They just need to feel tired. This is where older generations often get it wrong. They look at the result and invent the motive. They see delay, hesitation, distance, withdrawal, and say young people are afraid of commitment, too picky, too fragile, too selfish. But that reading protects the past, because many previous generations were allowed to enter love before they secured stability. A lot of people today feel the opposite. They feel they must become stable first before they are allowed to risk intimacy. That changes everything, because stability now comes later, costs more, feels less permanent, and for many people, never fully arrives. So love becomes conditional, not in theory, in practice. You can love, but only if rent is manageable, only if work leaves you human, only if your schedule is not broken, only if your mind can survive uncertainty, only if your self-worth can survive disappointment. That is not freedom. That is intimacy filtered through precarity. This generation is not too weak for love. Love arrived at the worst possible time. And the price is not just financial, it is psychological too. To date now is to expose yourself repeatedly in a culture that often rewards detachment. You have to hope while pretending not to care too much. Invest while acting casual. Stay open while protecting yourself. That wears people down. Enough ambiguous endings, enough half connections, enough conversations that vanish without explanation, enough effort that leads nowhere. Eventually, withdrawal stops feeling cynical. It starts feeling rational. That is why so many people do not seem heartbroken. They seem drained. And drained people do not make dramatic declarations. They simply stop volunteering for one more heavy thing. Love did not disappear. Margin disappeared. That is why the phrase, "people do not date anymore," explains almost nothing. It describes behavior. It hides the cause. People did not suddenly stop wanting closeness. Closeness just became harder to trust, harder to sustain, and harder to recover from. And recovery matters. Because in an already overloaded life, heartbreak is not just sadness, it is damage to function. Sleep slips, focus breaks, work suffers, routine collapses, momentum disappears. So yes, people become more careful. Why would they not? If your emotional resources are already low, if your future already feels unstable, if daily life already takes too much out of you, then love does not only look beautiful, it also looks dangerous. Not because love changed in essence, because the conditions around it did. That is why this cannot be reduced to attitude. Not when the same hesitation appears through different cultures and different systems. Not when the same retreat appears through different social rules. Not when people across multiple regions keep arriving at the same emotional conclusion. This is bigger than personality. It is historical. A generation raised in instability learns to approach intimacy differently. A generation taught to optimize everything struggles to relax into vulnerability. A generation living under constant pressure does not treat love as a simple adventure. It treats love as another high-stakes decision. And once that happens, something fundamental shifts. Love stops being only hope. It becomes another place where failure can cost too much. So no, the cleaner story is not the truer one. Young people did not all become shallow, or narcissistic, or emotionally defective. That accusation is convenient because it protects the world that produced them. It says the system is fine, the people are the problem. But if the same pattern keeps appearing in the United States, in Europe, in East Asia, then the harder answer is probably the right one. The environment changed, the timeline broke, the burden increased, and love got trapped inside all of it. Maybe that is the real shift of this era. Not that people believe less in love, but that they can no longer separate love from survival. That is why this generation sounds so conflicted. People still want warmth, still want loyalty, still want relief, still want to be understood, still want a place that feels like home. But they also know what relationships can demand in a world already stretched thin. So they hesitate, not because they feel nothing, because they feel too much at once. Hope, fear, desire, calculation, loneliness, self-protection. That mixture is modern, and it is global. So maybe the real question is not why does this generation avoid relationships? Maybe the real question is harsher. What happens to a generation when even love starts to feel like a luxury? What happens when intimacy begins to require the same things everything else now requires? Money, resilience, timing, emotional stamina, and tolerance for risk. What happens is what we are seeing now: delay, withdrawal, ambivalence, exhaustion mistaken for coldness, self-protection mistaken for indifference. That is the tragedy. Not that people stopped caring, but that caring became so expensive. Maybe this generation did not become worse at love. Maybe love itself became harder to survive, more expensive, more conditional, more entangled with unstable lives. And when that happens across countries, across economies, across cultures, this is no longer a personal failure. It is a historical condition. So if you have ever said, "I am just focusing on myself right now," or maybe later, or "I just do not have the energy," or "I just want peace," maybe that was true. But maybe underneath it was a simpler sentence: "I cannot carry one more heavy thing." And that is what makes this story global. Not that people stopped believing in love, but that all over the world, more and more people are asking the same question. Not, "Do I want it?" Can I survive it?